Okay, so I've mentioned it when we went over the schedule. So Vrui is the virtual reality user interface library. Well, I guess I have slides, and it's an open source virtual reality library. One of the things that kind of attracted us, we used it a little bit at my facility at Desert Research Institute, and one of my colleagues went to Idaho and kind of introduced them to it, and they started using it, so it's spreading around a little bit. But one of the things that kind of attracts people to Vrui, ourselves included, is that it has some really good tools that already exist. It does some really nice things. Now, I don't always like the user interface. I don't always like configuring it, so I'm not, 100% amorous of it, but it has some really nice tools to use, and so you can bring it up. Yes, Dave? Oh, yes, you may. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say that I'm very interested in the LiDAR thing, but I wanted to just mention the one gotcha that is holding us back is that it is Linux only.
Right, and actually I probably don't even say that in my slides, so good that you mentioned it, yes. Right, well, Vrui's not Linux only. It also runs on OS X. Actually, I don't think there are. I was tempted to do one when I was at DRI, but yeah, Dave asked if there were any OS X caves. So no. So yes, it's Unix-like only systems at this point. It relies on X Windows and things like that. And Oliver isn't too keen on expanding that at this point.
How many people here are Windows only?
That's a good question. So Michigan, Disney, Duke, and you're Windows only at the moment, but you're not married to that, or?
No, we're going to try to have a
Dual boot, okay.
Oak Ridge lab.
Right, so Oak Ridge, their cave is Windows only. They're getting pressure to change that, I think, but that may or may not happen. But they do have big tile display wall that's a Linux system, the Everest. Right. So that's the repelling thing for some people, is that doesn't run in Windows. But the attraction part is that it has some very nice tools that run in it. Once you get it configured, you can load in lots, a handful of different tools, and you're ready to go. And it was designed specifically for immersive visualization, so it has the user interface things that are there for VR. Now, I mentioned earlier, it also adopted some of the 2D things we're used to, menus and kind of little panels that are like 2D panels that would be on your desktop, except they can float in space now. And so again, that sort of has some comfort, but it also kind of is not really expanding into the possibilities that VR provides. And so the author of Vrui is Oliver Krylos, and he's at UC Davis. He started writing it as a PhD student. He now works for what's called the Keck Caves. Their cave facility is located in their geology department, so their geologists actually own their cave, which I guess kind of makes sense. And it was funded by the Keck Foundation, and so that's why the Keck is in there. And so he basically started this, like I said, as part of his PhD work, and he was working specifically with domain scientists, and they had some VR facilities. Even before they had a cave, they had tile displays with tracking and like a small desktop style virtual reality. All right, so the goal really then was to have an immersive visualization toolkit, not just that works in their caves, because, well, they didn't have necessarily a cave, but they had tiled, and they also recognized that scientists aren't always going to come to their VR facilities. They want to be able to still be familiar with the tool and use it at their desktop. And one of the things Oliver sort of lamented about other VR libraries is that when you use them on the desktop, they just give you this simulator mode, and so that's not really, the simulator mode was really for debugging an application that you would then run in your VR facility. It's not meant for using as an end user interface. So he didn't like that. I think there is actually a good place for simulator modes in debugging and actually configuring systems, but he is correct in that the desktop interface wasn't really integrated into most virtual reality visualization tools at the time. So these are some bullets that are more or less off his design documents. He basically wanted abstractions in order to make it work across platforms, things that where you have a 6 degree of freedom device that if you have a wand that you can move in space, then you have 6-degree of freedom object. Well, but if you're on the desktop, you have a little object that you can kind of grab and maybe rotate and move around through your limited mouse interface, but that it would still be sort of mimicking what you do in the virtual reality space and still be usable. Right, and he also wants it so that you can pretty much, as long as you're on Windows or OS X, put it on your system, type make, more or less, and it compiles. Right? There are other VR systems which literally, and I mean literally, take 2 days to compile the dependencies and then the library. So that's a bad thing. This is a good thing here, what Oliver's done. And he also wanted to, gracefully work when not everything's there. Like it also will work with sound interfaces and Bluetooth, so you can use your Wii. But if you don't have a Bluetooth on your system, then you just don't get to use your Wii, and that's, not going to slow you down otherwise. And also he has these, in order to make it so that it works well across desktop to Cave, he kind of has these constraints on how you can program it so that you don't get yourself into a space where, well, now it doesn't work on the desktop. So he kind of enforces those a lot into how things are coded. All right, we're going to bring up a live demo in a moment, but you'll see that there's kind of 3 classes of menus that are available there. The first one you generally see is the tool menu, and you'll have a configuration file. He has lots of tools. So his style is you bring in the way to represent your data, but all the other stuff is pretty much part of Vrui, or it's little chunks, little fragments, little applets that you can load in and that are independent of the applications, and you can use it in each of the applications that you have. And so that's why a lot of the Vrui tools look similar, they operate similarly, and if you're familiar with one, then you can often adopt the next one rather easily. There's also a small systems menu, which has some kind of low-level VR controls, except for the scaling measurement tool, which I don't know why is part of the system menu. It's not part of this tool menu, but that's his call. And then if you're the application programmer, you create another menu system that has all the features that you want to turn on and off, how your specific application works. And then you map these to one of the buttons or something on your wand, and we'll do that in a moment.
Bill,
Yeah.
Can I mention on the menu and the interaction in Vrui, I think one thing that's helped the game in Idaho is we do the crazy thing is we hand over the glasses and the wand to the people that are coming to see it.
Yeah.
And it only takes like 5 seconds of training, and most people can navigate, move stuff around, and interact with the game. I guess that's something I'd never dare do if this was a complex interface.
Right. Yeah.
So it's intuitive, fairly, well, not
It's intuitive once everything is set up nicely, right? Right, so the tools, that tool menu, like I said, there's a lot of these little things. And you have buttons which, when you sort of start the system as a vanilla system, you have all these buttons and none of them do anything except bring up the tools menu. And what you do is then you map those buttons to operations, to tools, and then you can discard them if you run out of buttons. Uh-oh. All right, you can discard them. You can basically map, and we'll see this in a moment. You can map any button, any unmapped button, or you can map any unmapped button to a tool. Right. So you click on it and then you release it. Let me see what I'm saying here. Right. So the first thing you usually do is you map the application menu to one of your buttons. Otherwise, you don't have access to the application menu. There are also some tools that have chording capabilities, and the most basic is you can either grab the world or you can grab and zoom the world. You can use the grab button is usually we map that to, say, the trigger on our wand, and then if we want to zoom, we'll map that to one of the other buttons. So there's a little dialog that pops up that says once you've clicked something that requires chording, it then sort of prompts you to enter in new things, and that's actually new with his 2.x series of Vrui. It's a little more convenient. And then there's some things that are kind of, so the system menu, actually don't get access to that until you bring up the application menu. And then at the end of the application menu is the system menu, and then it has a few kind of minor things. So there's a dialog list where you can summon some of the dialogues that you've already popped up. Kind of one of the nice new features that he's added is a scaling tool. So one of the things that Oliver does is it's all about visualization. So generally he brings it down, he scales it so you can see your whole data set. You can then later expand it and move through it. But he always scales it so that it kind of fits in your space. And so then you don't necessarily know what scale the data is at. And so now he's added a scale tool that enables that. It also lets you rescale the data itself. It shows you the scale and lets you change the scale. All right, and so he provides all these widgets, most of which, like I say, are familiar with us, who are used to using the desktop. It's often something that, again, attracts people to using Vrui. Certainly, my colleague at the Desert Research Institute, when we were writing a volume visualization tool, he wanted to do the volume visualization graphics, right? He wanted to do the transfer functions, these things. He didn't want to spend his time creating his own widget library or creating simple widgets or using, if you have 12 buttons, trying to map everything to 12 buttons and then trying to memorize that. So Vrui really was one of the things that sort of the widgets of Vrui was one of the reasons that we were attracted to that. And then again, I've mentioned it provides this common interface between applications. They all have kind of the same look and feel, and so you're used to one, you can use the other. We adopted the 2D interface. And then you bring up a lot of them and are kind of contained in these little dialog panels, which are just like little 2D planes that you interact with and happen to float in 3 space. You can set your menus to actually physically align exactly on a screen, which means the stereo map's better, they don't move around, you'll know where they're going to be. But you can also dismiss them, get rid of them, and grab them. And so I think, there we go, we're going to actually start a program here. And I'll need the mouse. It's all right. We'll just do this. I have it set, ready to go, I hope. All right. Oops. I meant to configure it that way. We'll take care of that in the break. All right, so I need the wand. So we got stereo glasses. Should we get the break out the stereo glasses? Get a little pipeline going there. So the reason we have this skull here is because one of the problems with demonstrating virtual reality when you have stereo is that the stereo is always specific for each eye of the glasses. And so if you're wearing the stereo glasses and I happen to turn like this, it's just reversed the stereo on you and your eyes are backwards. So for the most part, when I'm demonstrating up here and you're sitting there, we'll keep the glasses here. And I may move them around like this a little bit to show things, but I'll try and keep it so the stereo is always comfortable for you. And I'm actually going to wear my own pair of glasses then. And I'll mention while we're doing this too, so the glasses that we're using, if you haven't seen these before, these are the NVIDIA ProVision glasses. And one of the nice things about them is that they use RF as the signal rather than infrared, which is what a lot of the old active glasses used. So with the infrared, of course, if there's people standing in front of you, they would block your infrared vision. The stereo glasses would go out. They actually also, on the Windows machine, it monitors the battery levels on these so we can know if the batteries have gone down, whereas sometimes you give a demo to people, the glasses weren't working the entire time and they just don't tell you because they don't know any better or they're too shy. And so they don't really get to see the good experience. I mean, the point of showing it to them is that they get to see something nice. And so we'd rather know when the batteries are low. Of course, if your batteries go low and we don't know, then tell us. We have some, if you find some that are dirty too, I think we have some cleaning materials. But I think they've probably all been cleaned recently, so you should be in good shape. All right, so this is kind of the first demo program that you compile. If you just compile Vrui, and then it has a directory of example programs. This is kind of example number 1, well, or 2. There's some really simple ones, but this one does something. So let me go through. So our wand here has 6 buttons and a little joystick. When things start up, all the buttons. Oops. Let me move this guy back here so we can get a better view. So I'm going to stand off here. I'm going to try and move around so that everybody gets to see at some point. All right, so this is the tool selection menu, and no matter which button I push, it'll bring me that same one. So I'm pushing different buttons. It's bringing me that same menu. And that basically has a categorization of the different tools that are configured into this particular thing of Vrui. So the first thing I might want to do then is say do navigation. I don't want to do it with that button. So I'm going to use the button that I want to navigate which is our trigger. I'll select navigation, and the one I want is the 6 degree of freedom plus scaling. And so when I have that, I'm going to let go, and then it brings me, this is the dialog. So this has this chording option, so the scaling is part of the chording operation. And so now I want to use the rightmost button as when I want to scale. So now that I've mapped it, when I push that button again, I no longer get the tool menu. I now can grab the world and move it around, and it'll go over there, go on the floor. So everything's from this guy's perspective at the moment. And so there's that. And then if I chord and use my other button, I've now scaled it up. So instead of bringing it closer to me, I've made it larger. And we can know that because there's also a scale thing, which we mentioned. And I'm going to choose a new button. And what I'm going to do is now, we don't have access to the application menu yet. So that's under the menu handler under the user interface. So this is the kind of thing. There's a lot of these tools for Vrui. Normally, though, you can pre-program this stuff in the configuration file. I'm just showing you how it's done. So normally, and in the examples I show, you'll see it's all pre-mapped. And so you don't actually have to go through this every time. I'm just showing how it's done. So we have two ways we can have menus. We can have them freestanding, which means floating in space, or put on the screen and screen align. I'll do a freestanding one here. So now when I push the button I just pushed, I now get the application menu, which has got its own title. It's got all these things that have been programmed in. Plus now I have access through the system thing. And one of the things I can do is bring up the scale bar. And I can grab this. And so this scale bar shows us basically relative space on things. Now, one of the downsides of the scale bar is it always renders last and on top of whatever it is. So if I grab the globe and bring it closer, it messes up the stereo for us because the scale bar isn't being rendered in the right order. So let me put it over here where it's not so bad. It won't mess, because the globe is actually in the space with us. Oh, maybe not actually. So the downside is with the scale bar is it kind of gives us the sense of things, but we can't actually like line it up and see where things are. There's another tool for that, and that's under, I'm going to map. That's this under the utility menu. We have an actual measurement tool, and now that brought up this huge dialog, which, oops, I'm now going to float over here. So this is, again, it's floating in space. We can kind of orient this thing however we want. And that lets us kind of control its size by controlling its distance. So now the button I mapped that to is kind of off to the right here. And it has this little cursor. And all this cursor is doing is telling us the XYZ space position in, and it's actually tied to the data. So it's moving because the Earth is rotating. So when I put it somewhere, it stays relative to the Earth where I want it. So let's bring the Earth out here a little bit. And so it's just telling us a 3D location relative to our data set. Now, one of the other things we can do is we have our application menu. Oops, I lost it. There we go. Just stop the Earth from rotating. And then if, say, we want to measure something, we can actually go into, instead of measuring a point, we can set that, oops, I'm not wearing the track glasses, make it a little more difficult. We can set it to a distance so it lets us set 2 points. So if I want to measure, across some peninsula here, I'll bring the cave out. So now the cave is actually kind of in the space. So now you can see the wand avatar thing disappears when I put it through the cave, and I'll move around so everybody can see that. And now if I push the button that I mapped to our little position thing, I can see when I'm hitting the sphere. And then I can put the second one over here. Of course, we're not doing curvature of the Earth measurements, but this is telling us, 11,000 or 1,100 rather kilometers basically from here to here. And again, if we turn on the rotate Earth, that sticks to the Earth. Find my menu. And so those things stick to the Earth. If I stick my head in the Earth, there we can see it over there, measuring on the inside curvature. All right. And there's some other things on here. That's kind of the main one. We can actually also measure physical space instead of what we call user space, or the kind of the data space. If I can get that to click, there we go. So now if I measure something, I can actually measure, wrong button. There we go. I'm measuring something physical here. Say I'm actually measuring, this part of the screen. And so it tells me that it's 43 inches because now it's scaled based on the physical world space. And you'll see that it's not rotating with the world because it's not part of the world's data space. And one of the other things I neglected to show on the scale widget, if I can, whoops, is we can grab it. We can also, if we click on one side of it, it actually affects the scale. When we click on the other side, it grows the scale, and it goes in 1, 2, 5 increments between orders of magnitude. All right, so let me stop that for a moment. All right, so those were the things we were going to talk about there, and then let me jump to the next slide. Ah, yes. Start up again. All right, so there's all those tools in that list which now I have to map. So all these tools, so there's locators, a lot of different navigation things, transforms. A lot of these are experimental. They come with Vrui as if you want to use them, but they're actually still under testing, so you're not going to want to, you might want to explore it at first, but you're not going to use all these things whenever. You're going to find, the 5 or 6 that you use regularly, and then you're going to probably pre-configure that into your configuration file, and then you'll never have to deal with it. Like you might always put the measurement tool on a certain button. Generally, you're always going to put the navigation on a certain button. So one of the things I want to do is say, let's map navigation again. And maybe I used the wrong button. So maybe I'm using a button here, and we'll do that, and I'll do another one. And so now if I use that button, I can navigate. But I don't like, I wanted to use the trigger. It was a mistake for me to map this button. Over here, this big red thing is the kill zone. And so it's actually physically located in space right about here. You can put it wherever you want, of course. If you're on the desktop, it becomes a little frustum in the corner usually of your screen. And a lot of times what Oliver does is you can map it to where the head is relative to the head. So he likes to, he's throwing things away over his shoulder. But we've done it here right in this space. I'm going to move the wand so I know where it is for the head. So now if I push that, but I don't want that button to do it, if I put this inside this little kill zone and press and release, it will go away. But before I do that, if I want, I can actually press and move it out, and it'll tell me what it is that's mapped to that button. And so I've pushing the button, and I've mapped the wand navigation to that particular button. Right? But if I release the button when I'm inside there, now when I push the button again, I get the menu again, and it's disassociated with navigation.
Bill, we make our kill zone invisible. We set it up at a certain place in the cave, but then we
Right.
turn off the color.
Right, yeah, I'm making it highly obvious here, but yes. And then, like I say, a lot of time, what Oliver does is he just kind of puts it on your shoulder and clicks. And I wanted to show one more thing. And let me see. So I need a user interface first. Do a freestanding menu. And so say I guess I need the navigation back again too. So let me do the navigation real quick. All right, so say I have a view of the Earth that I really like, and turn the rotate off. So I really like this view. There's under the system menu, there's a way to save and store views, so I can save this view, and then it brings up this dialog. And so it already noticed that there was one view saved, and so it automatically increments the number, so I don't have to do any typing. And I can just click OK. I'll have to remember what that number was, of course. So I need to do it from his perspective. There we go. Click OK. There we go. And now I can move the world. Let's put it way over here. All right. And then I can reload that view again. So this is, if you want to annotate, you have certain things that you want to show someone else. So we can choose the one we just created. So especially if you're giving demos and there's something that's hard to find, but you really like to show people where it is, you can kind of set up these views ahead of time and then kind of select them. I did one earlier when I was practicing, so we can load that one. So that one's in space there. All right, so those are kind of the generic things for Vrui. And Eric, if I left anything out, you can. All right, so I guess I didn't point out the render dialog. Let me do that real quick. We discussed it, but I didn't specifically talk about it. So, okay, so I'm going to map a menu. That's one thing I can do. One of the things the menu has sometimes is different dialogues that you can bring up. And so this is, again, one of these just kind of 2D panels. And then on the panel, it has these kind of things that I'm sure you can figure out what they do, right? So I can control this transparency of the surface with this little slider. We can turn on now that it's transparent, we can see inside, so we can turn on the cores. Oops, that's the grid. The cores and how transparent they are. Inner core, make that one way opaque. There we go. There's no earthquake data in here, so there's no point in doing that. We turn on fog maybe. There we go. So, oops. So again, we have these little dialogues. They're just 2D panels with kind of standard 2D widgets on it. You'll see in the talk after the break that there's some that have a little bit more 3D to them, but not a lot. It's mostly, this is the kind of user interface that Vrui provides, but again, it's kind of comforting, you know how to use it. And really what you're looking to do is interact with your data, by walking around it and sticking your head inside it, right? I mean, that's really what you're kind of hoping to gain. It would be nice if your widgets, could take advantage, but if at least you can get to where you want to go because you're familiar with it, then that's a big leap. Yes?
What's the difference between the minimize and close?
That's a good question, and one that you probably should ask Oliver. So I think if you minimize it, it does, well, there we go. Okay. There's under the Vrui system, there's this dialogues list. And so that display settings was one of the things that'll repop it up. If you close it, oops. If you close it, it's removed from that list. So it's gone. But if you leave it up there, then it's still there. You might have left it, you might have lost it off to the side or something, and you can resummon it with that little dialogues menu. That's the difference that I've found. I don't know why you really need to have that many that many options for that task. Usually necessity is the mother of invention, so something must have happened that encouraged Oliver to do that. All right, so that's the end of the Vrui talk.